And now here's part 2 of our episode. What a song. What a song. It's just how can you not feel happy hearing that song? But tell us, Derick, why is that the standout track from the album?
I think it's a song that it does all of the things. It's kind of the peak for me of the ideas in both musically and lyrically of the album. There's so many layers. It's 2 songs together.
Yep.
There's a slight change in pitch where the 2 songs come together as well, which I think is kind of cool. And then it comes back around at the end. It's the meeting of, you know, the rich girl and the poor boy. It's the
classic Simon.
Yeah. And the teaspoon and the wave, the teaspoon being like high society and the wave being a force of nature. Like, and that's a cool image, I think. And then the sound, all of the layers, like even at the end when the music kind of drops out and it's just the call and response, it's the voices of Ladysmith Black Mambazo and the percussion lines. And there's still like layers of percussion lines in there that just, it's all of that building together.
Yeah.
And it's for me, it's satisfying both conceptually and it makes you want to move. It's satisfying. It satisfies up in the head and right in the body. Like it's all of it.
Yeah, totally. 400,000 points, definitely.
Have you introduced this album or this song specifically to your kids yet?
I've played this album. I play this album, with some regularity. I haven't done it deliberately. Maybe it's that I teach adolescents, so anything you introduce to them deliberately, they immediately reject.
Yeah, gotta be careful.
You're supposed to. Like that's we all did the same thing, right?
Totally.
Yeah. On many levels, you kind of got to let them find it on their own. Well, like the Dylan story, I didn't open that until I went and chased it down myself.
Yeah.
If my dad had been like, "Here, you need to listen to this," I would have made fun of his voice endlessly. And then secretly listen to it on my own, like once I had a car. I do introduce my girls to a whole bunch of different things. I wanted the first, when they were babies, I wanted the first musical they heard to be The Wiz. That was my first musical. And
cool.
I've loved it. Like I watched the movie all the time.
Yeah.
And I had the Broadway soundtrack, which is slightly different. It was, so like I had them, it was like making lunch and my wife was teaching, Jackie was teaching, and I was home and I had them up on the counter in their bouncers and I had it playing. And so I do stuff like that a lot. Mm-hmm. But I feel like this one, because it is like I connect so much with it, I want them to connect with it, but what I really want is for them to find something that they connect with, like I connect with this. Mm-hmm. That's the thing. Like, I'm not going to push this particular thing on them. The function of this for me is like of Graceland in my kids' life is for them to see how much somebody can enjoy something.
Oh, yeah.
Enjoy music.
Well said. Yeah. And then you get to peek over your shoulder as they see you enjoying it.
Yeah. And then when they find their thing that they enjoy, and they look back, I'm definitely going to shake my head and be like, "Oh, I don't understand.
I don't get it."
And then when they slam the door in my face, I'll be like,
It's happening. I can see it happening.
They found their thing. I don't get it at all. But they found their thing.
There's I have to call out the first time I ever heard the name Ladysmith Black Mambazo. It was in Mean Girls, when Anna Gasteyer goes, "But you love Ladysmith Black Mambazo," and that's one of the best lines in a movie from the aughts for sure. It's just such a brilliant line, and she delivers it so perfectly. To add on to this, I think it showcases them so well in this song. It feels pretty equal. Like it kind of feels like, even though Simon's clearly leading the thing, like it doesn't feel like they are just, at least to me, and this is just my whatever bias is, but like it does feel like he's lifting them up, which feels good.
Well, and the thing is, like, there's a couple of things in that, like Dr. Joseph Shabalala has co-writing credit on this.
Yeah.
Of all of the, because that's where a lot of the trouble is with this album, is the credits.
Mm-hmm.
But this is one that is appropriately credited, and in terms of the co-writing, and they were, Ladysmith Black Mambazo was already a big, powerhouse vocal group.
Yeah.
In Africa at the time. And so this meeting was really like, it was this really cool, hey, here's something that is excellent from here, and here's something that's excellent from there. And there again is that idea of two things coming together.
Mm-hmm.
In the process of this album,
synergistically.
Yeah, and it just like you said, it just sounds so good. It's both of these things, both of these elements sounding so good.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one where they, it's really Ladysmith Black Mambazo in the lead is Homeless.
Homeless, yeah.
And that's something that they use, if I remember correctly, that's something that they used to perform at music competitions.
Mm-hmm.
And like that was their they dominated with it, was pretty much what they did. And
like
then,
Pitch Perfect, but with Ladysmith Black Mambazo.
That's right. That's it.
Yeah.
And then Paul Simon added, a little thing to that, but they're really in the lead in that.
Yeah.
And I think about like the potential for all of the things that could have gone right that aren't quite right with the credits in on this album.
Yeah.
Like the co-writing thing. That to me says that the fact that track exists to me and that it's included on the album says to me that the idea was there and he just fell short of what he needed to do. Like he didn't do what he should have done. He didn't do right.
You've already started to dive into this, and I think you knew we were going to talk
Let's
about
go
this.
there, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
there's more than just the credits issue with this album. Like, there's also, I mean, first of all, he traveled to South Africa during a time when there was a sort of a cultural boycott on people going to South Africa because of their policy of apartheid.
Right.
And I like his explanation for violating that. I makes sense to me. The issues I have are, I mean, some of the other groups that are featured on this album perhaps should have been given writing credits on them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And also, though, and this to me might, I mean, when I didn't know this part, that there was another artist who brought a tape of the music to him and said, hey, will you help me produce an album that sounds like this? And he was like, ooh, this sounds really cool. And then sort of like ghosted her for a while and then said, oh, by the way, I'm going to make an album that's essentially this music. And like, I can't remember the name of the artist
Heidi
specifically.
Berg.
Yes.
Heidi Berg was her name.
Yeah. Like, I guess, I mean, where's the question in this? I guess the question in this is, like, I'm assuming you did not know any of these things when you first discovered this album or this music.
No, I was 7.
Yeah, exactly. If you if you did know those things at that age, I would be like, wow.
Damn, Derick.
Yeah.
But you would also know that I was completely lying, and yeah, yeah, I totally knew that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, because
I didn't know long division, but
but you knew
I understood the
was problematic.
The violation of apartheid.
The geopolitical context of the album was so clear to you at the time.
I guess
as an 8-year-old, I was telling people, maybe that isn't his risk to take. It's a good risk, but I don't know that that's his.
I guess so. I guess the question is then, like, how does that change your appreciation of the album today?
So this has been my recent struggle. I think one of these ideas of perfection is that, to me, it's something that stays with you. And part of it staying with you means it has to be active. It can't just be what it was. That's a picture. Like that's great. There's a place for that. But that isn't this place that I want to deal with when I'm defining what's a perfect album for me. This one changes and it challenges, and it's got terrible flaws in its story of the credits and the reaction. One of the things I think is interesting is when we talk about, I mean you personally, but when we talk about the idea of challenging and violating the boycott, is you have to look to the people most directly affected. And what you see are mixed things. You see some groups in Africa, particularly in South Africa, where the apartheid was, in place, who are frustrated with it and angry with it, and they don't agree. They don't think that's, that it was the right thing to do. Then you also have, if you talk to, if you look at what Joseph Shabalala, when he would talk about the experience of recording the album and collaborating on the album, he has positive things to say. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the impact, there are people who are upset, and rightly so, with the fact that this was that it was done this way, including the inclusion of Linda Ronstadt, who had played at a
resort of some kind.
Yeah, a resort
a
few years earlier. There are other people who are saying, well, look at what it did. Look at the effect that it had in bringing attention to what's there. It brought things closer to people who were far away. It became, part of it is because, because the album was all over the place. It over here, it became something that caught people's attention. A lot of several different kinds of African music and African styles caught people's attention here in a way that they wouldn't necessarily have done. It wasn't so remote. It was, I love this. This is great. That's what's going on. And that's by no means is that a hero statement, and by no means is that necessarily what he was trying to do in its entirety, but it is part of the experience. Mm-hmm. I think as far as that goes, I don't get to make that call. It's not like, it's not my, I have my thoughts, I have my opinions, but it's not my, I don't have the weight to I would have to defer to others who had a more at stake.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to trust what I've seen there. And
I
part
think
of
it's a fair response, right?
Yeah.
You, as much as we're placing you in a place of authority on this podcast,
I'm not responsible. I don't get to make the call on geopolitical,
to coin a phrase, we're just some fucking guys,
That's right. That's right. But yeah, it's we're just sitting here talking about what our thoughts are from here and now,
Mm-hmm.
all these years later.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's in some respects we get the benefit of hindsight.
Definitely.
In other respects, we don't know what the hell we're talking about necessarily, because we weren't in that game. We weren't in that, in that struggle to that extent. So I think there's something important to recognize there. I also, you got to give the floor to the people who were. And I think the other part of that struggle for me, because that is something where I don't get to, my voice doesn't get to lead, right? It shouldn't lead.
Mm-hmm.
So the struggle that I've really been working with this album recently is the thing about the credits.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hard because I get upset when somebody gets credit for a joke in a conversation. And I was like, that was my choice. And it was hard to be like, yeah, you know what? That's really Rockin Dopsie and the Twisters. That's really based on their song. And the big one is Los Lobos. That should be that should be a co-credited song. That came from Los Lobos.
Mm-hmm.
And the writing of the lyrics and such, there's more to it. There's a collaboration. And in that story, that Steve Berlin from Los Lobos tells is that it was a co-writing idea. It was a co-writing credit.
Mm-hmm.
Because the jam session starts with what they have. And so it was the spirit of real collaboration. And he didn't live up to that. Paul Simon didn't live up to that.
Yeah.
So your choices end up being, do we throw this away? Or do we do right by the artists? Because if you throw it away, the artists who made those contributions that aren't recognized, because if we throw it away, to me, what that feels like is, I don't want to deal with this. It's not okay. And I think what's better, and what you're also throwing away the work of those artists, the art that they created as a part of this process.
Yeah.
And so to me, the thing that feels right for me, and I understand it's different for other people, but the thing that feels right for me is to give those artists their due, give those as co-writers, as know who they are, go explore their catalog. At the very least, you get to have so much fun discovering Zydeco. It's seriously, check out Rockin Dopsie and the Twisters. It's fun. Check out. His son actually has a band, Rockin Dopsie Jr. and the Zydeco Twisters, and that is also fun.
They don't name bands like that anymore.
They don't.
We need more of that.
But yeah, you will expand your horizons, and if you don't know them already, and you will get to understand what the intention was that he didn't live up to necessarily in the execution of it, but of those influences. We want to share these influences. It's the person, it's the individual being in that world where you have the two things, going back to the idea there at the top of the album, the individual being in that world and getting all of those influences and letting all of those things happen. What you do with it is your choice. Yeah. And so I think he made the wrong choice at the end of the album, which is where the credit stuff really is most apparent. Early on, you do see co-writing credits in the track listing, but at the end, you don't. And
conspicuously absent from the second half of the album.
Yeah,
absolutely,
crazy,
absolutely. And so there's that like, ooh, here's this thing I love, where the artist did something wrong, where the artist committed a grave sin, you know. And so how do you make that right and appreciate the art? And I understand, like, for other people who have been in the position where credit is stolen or where they are shut out by, you know, somebody in a position of power. The pain that carries doesn't, you know, isn't worth the effort. That's to process, isn't worth processing. That's not what this should be for you then. Like this is something that for me, because I came to it as a kid and I've lived with it for so long, if I wanted to keep what I feel out of it, like what I feel I get out of the album, the music, then I need to deal with the problem in the way that it from my standing, and that's the personal part of it for me.
Yeah. Well, yeah. We'll go ahead and give you the 3 million points for for living in the gray area of it, because it's the history of rock and roll too, right? Like the history of rock and roll is appropriative.
It's just history
at its core.
Like, yeah.
Yes.
So, the Beatles were doing it. Led Zeppelin was doing it. It's just interesting. It's interesting to see such a specific example of it, and one that is in real time happening. Like the album itself, the birth and genesis of the album itself was kind of so specifically moving against these, these political tides.
Yes.
That, to be somebody in Paul Simon's position, and you get this idea that this is a great idea for me to open up a new audience for these artists, and then to just follow down that track and there is some value in a bold movement like that, but then you wonder, like, well, who's he listening to? Who's giving him advice along the way, and who is he opening himself up to being influenced by in taking this action? Yeah.
And how much of that is him? Like we talked about, the petty thing, right? If you've gone through this album and it's going to be, because he had to know, listening to this is phenomenal music. Just, this is incredible stuff. And to go through the list and be like, all right, co-credit, solo, co-credit, how much of it is, well, let me take what I can for myself. And so who's he listening to in terms of advice, or who is he ignoring in terms of advice? Like,
it bears,
he reaches ego limit in terms of like sharing the stage.
Is there a ceiling to that, Mr. Simon? It bears mentioning that Talking Heads Remain in Light came out 6 years before this, and was,
I love that album.
It's an incredible album, and was lifting influence from African artists in a way that was less direct, but I'm sure there's scholarly work out there that would indicate passages of music or certain musical ideas that were lifted straight from from African artists in that time. And that's not even to mention the way that David Byrne treated his own bandmates in terms of song credits and all that, right?
Yeah.
Which
there's another band I love that maybe not the greatest.
Right, exactly. So it's just, again, in some ways it's like, damn, Paul, you kind of just kept stepping in it. You kept stepping in it in a way that maybe you didn't have to. Maybe it didn't have to be this way.
It didn't. And the thing that I think is, I don't think it had to be this way at all, especially because when you look at who was playing on the album, it's the same people that he rips off. Like, it's not that he's taking an idea from somewhere else and being like, hey, no, he's like, hey, Rockin Dopsie and the Twisters, let's play That Was Your Mother. All right, we're going to write this song, and it's going to be totally based on it, but that's the backing band.
Yeah.
Myth of Fingerprints, Los Lobos, that's the backing band, because they're not really backing. This is a lot of what the album's talking about, and this is not intentional. This is not art squared. Is that you've got this great idea, this great intention, this great collaboration on an album that sonically and lyrically is about two different things coexisting and collaborating to make something incredible. And you're the person, we each control our own actions. So we can do with that innovation, we can do with that creativity what we see fit. And that's, so you have you have all of this stuff, this negative stuff with it, but you also have this beautiful art created. And to me, that's the pilgrimage. That's going to Graceland. That's is figuring out, what do you do with this now?
And that contributes to its perfection for you. The fact that
that's
it is
part of the perfection. It's meant different things at different times. That's just the most recent one.
Totally.
So what else makes this album perfect, or any album perfect? What are your standards for perfection?
It's that, all right. So I know that the skip track thing is a big talking point here, and I think you can skip tracks. I actually think that skip tracks can contribute to an album's perfection, can contribute to an album's longevity, because it's not that you get rid of it. It's that, there are different tracks I've skipped at different times over my living with this album. And then there's inevitably some time where you're in the car, you're thinking about something else, or you're doing dishes. Doing dishes is a big one for me. I listen to music while I'm doing dishes. Or you're doing something else, and then you don't think to skip it, or this time you're like, yeah, I'm just going to let it play. It's fine. And then it hits you in a totally new way. And because that track that you are so used to skipping hits you differently this time, it changes a little bit about everything else on the album. And that keeps that relationship with the album active. It's long-term. Perfection to me in an album or a work of art is something that includes that change, that, you digest it differently. You look at it in a lot of different ways, and it can challenge you, and it can comfort you, and it can celebrate, and you can struggle with it.
We might call this the Smackwater Jack rule. The infamous song from Tapestry that makes no sense.
Sure. I mean, anytime you can bring Carole King in is like. Yeah, so it's been different things. Right now, I'm in a place where I'm not skipping anything. I listen all the way through. It is an album that I put on it. I mean, you get that first nice day in Chicago where it's cool, but it's warm enough. And you like, Yeah, the windows are going to be rolled down here, and the album gets turned all the way up. And I'm sitting at a red light, and like that bass line, that bass solo in "Call Me Out." Well, I have a personal rule where I turn that up every time it comes on, like blast it.
Got to.
Like that.
You love a red light, Derick. This guy loves a red light.
Apparently, I just like sitting in traffic.
You really do. All your best ideas come to you in traffic.
That's right. Well, you know, I'm an only child, didn't have anybody to talk to. I like my alone time.
Fair enough.
But yeah, like it's, you know, that we didn't even talk about the brilliance of the fact that is the same thing. That bass line is the same thing going down and then coming back up.
It cannot be replicated live. Yeah.
It is perfect for the album because the whole thing is like looking at, like, that's, if you just played the bass solo from Call Me Out, that's the whole idea. That's the whole idea sonically.
It's such a good song.
Listen to, like, if you just, I kind of wonder what the album would sound like if I just listened to the rhythm section. Like the bass lines are
great,
phenomenal.
yeah.
Obviously the percussion is it's great.
The fact that you mentioned the no skips thing, I alluded to this earlier in our conversation. I'm pretty sure that it was you and I having a conversation in London. I think it was in London, where we talked about like what a 5-star album would be.
Oh yeah. The Cool Mosinski 5-star album.
Yeah, that it's like a song that we'll come put a pin in that, Tyler.
I'm dying over here. I'm dying.
That like an album that like you could listen to start to finish, and just everything about it was fantastic. And that to me still is sort of, for me, that's the origin of this podcast. It goes all the way back to 2000, as far as I'm concerned.
That's also a series of those conversations. I think about those conversations all the time. I do. And this is also where I discovered, Mike has much higher standards than I do. Maybe I should start listening to things more critically.
Well,
and like really listen close, not just be like, yeah, this is a great song. Yeah. Like maybe there's more to it. And and so
I think you've demonstrated you think pretty critically about these things. I think you have.
Yeah, I mean, it's that's part of what I do. I'm a teacher. I'm a reading and writing teacher. This is writing, and this is a storytelling podcast, because music, these kinds of songs are means of storytelling. So it's the same root, even if the art forms are little variations.
Well, Derick, this has been it's such a fruitful conversation. I'm really glad you've gone into the deep water with us. But at the end of the day, it's about who's wrong and who's right, and there's only one right and there's only one wrong. It's all that gray area stuff. It's just made up. So we're going to go back through the points that I gave you, and we're going to see if you did a good enough job building the case for this album's perfection. I wrote down, because I don't know if I can really say it too many more times out loud without spontaneously combusting, but the Cool Mosinski 5-star album is just something that I might need to get tattooed on me. So that's on the board. There's no points on it, but it's gigantic. 3 million points for living in the gray area with this album and trying to adjust how you interface with it over time, knowing that it's a finished document, and that it will, you must grow with it. Just that whole conversation, I think, was a really great way of putting it. I wrote down that the perfect album has to actively grow over time. 2 million points for that. 400,000 points for you feel it in your head and your body with Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes. Like, it's it hits every synapse necessary for a standout track. 30,000 points for hoping you get caught at a red light so that you can hear the rest of You Can Call Me Al. I mean, you do a lot of red light music listening, which I respect. 20,000 points for Boy in the Bubble being the thesis statement of the album. 60,000 for the funny fact that art can be deliberate or accidental in its success and the way that it affects us. Art squared, as you call it. 100,000 points for invoking Sam Goody, rest in peace. 40,000 points for this being a storytelling podcast as opposed to really a music analysis podcast, which I'm just fine with that. 3 million points for mentioning the great American pastime of baseball. We haven't even dug into that. 1 million points for talking about how music is tone for your life and tone in sort of the larger sense. I think that's a really beautifully put thing. And then you also gave me 19 Simons and 1 Garfunkel for my 60-second recap, which is a pretty strong board overall, wouldn't you say, Michael?
I think so. I mean,
yeah.
Is it? Yeah.
But it's really up to you, man. Like you brought Derick to us specifically to talk about this album. And so tell our listeners, has he done enough? Is Paul Simon's Graceland a perfect album? Does it go to 11?
I mean, yeah, I'm not going to be that dick who says like, yeah, thanks for coming on and talking to us, Derick. Now, see your way home. I don't know. Yes, Paul Simon's Graceland goes to 11. It may join the pantheon.
Woo! Graceland goes to 11. Paul Simon, not so much.
Ooh, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah,
I like that. Yes.
Yeah.
Well said.
Paul Simon can go somewhere else. So, Derick, we asked you to choose a standout track, and it's funny to me that you had another one in mind, because if you hadn't chose Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes, I might have flown to Chicago and driven to your house and shaken you and been like, who are you? What have they done with Derick Loafmann? But we also, as you know, we choose a standout track. Are you curious to hear which one we chose, and or do you want to predict which one we chose?
You know what? I'm just curious. I want to know. I want to know what stood out to you.
It could only really be one. It had to be You Can Call Me Al, honestly.
Yeah, we're basic.
Yeah, but it's still an excellent choice. Like
it is. And it is a prototypical 80s song. And it is when I think of the 80s, like the beginning of this song really does, this and a few other songs like are coming to my head. It's just it's momentous, it's anthemic, it's like a party. It sounds like a million people are playing on it. The horns go so freaking hard. It makes me happy. You can sing along. It just does everything, right, Michael?
And it's got a great music video that I cannot not see when I hear the song, which feels like often becomes I'm detecting a pattern. I tend to choose standout tracks where I'm like, I just have to see the video. The video is ingrained in my memory, and that's decidedly the case here. And the irony being, of course, that it turns out that Chevy Chase might also be a fairly problematic person. So let's it's like, wasn't that a nice little video between the two of them? And now that we know everything we know, it's like, well, fingers and ears.
You know what? I don't need to watch the video. I memorized the dance. That's
so you're
there.
Good.
You go. You're all
it's
set.
A lot easier than Thriller.
Chevy Chase, we hope you're okay.
Thriller, man. As I've referenced on a Back to One, I really wish I knew that choreography on command.
There was a time where you knew part of it on command.
I know, we both did.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, we'll have to save that story.
Performed it.
We'll have to save that story for another time, dear listeners. Well, Derick, thank you for accepting the volunteering that I volunteered you for to be on our podcast to talk about Paul Simon's Graceland. It was basically, not to show our cards too much, but someone did bring it up last season or maybe 2 seasons ago, and I told Tyler, I'm like, nope, I got someone.
Wait.
I got someone who should talk about this one. So
I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, thanks, dear listeners, for tuning in, and hope you enjoyed the episode. We'll see you next week.
Bye.